Newcastle United 2, Brentford 3. Now, I could have talked about this yesterday, but I thought I'd let the social media storm blow over a little bit, let everybody get all their tantrums out, which I'm not saying undeserved, by the way. Before I got into this, now, this isn't just going to be a match reaction. I'm going to talk about, all things to do with Newcastle United right now and why it's going so horribly wrong on the pitch. But in terms of the game yesterday itself, we were just awful from start to finish, weren't we now? At least in midweek at the Man City game, right? First half was probably one of the worst halves of football I've ever seen us play, even this season when we've been poor. But at least against them, we changed the system and came out second half and gave it a bit of a go. Now, granted, the pressure was off. We were never going to come back in that game, but we had chances to make that score a bit more respectable, right? So at least we came out and gave it something. Against Brentford, there was literally nothing there. Going forward, there was no creativity in the midfield. There was no cohesiveness. There was no structure, no balance at all. Defensively, they got hung out to dry on multiple occasions, but there was just little mistakes in there, little individual mistakes, which were putting us on the back foot repeatedly. A lot of the discourse over the past few weeks has been about Eddie Howe and his lack of ability to adapt tactically during the game, and also the tactical rigidity, playing the same system every week and expecting it to work. But if you actually look at our systems over the past few weeks, we played a lot of different ways recently, right? Which is clearly his way of trying to figure something out to get the best out of what is currently a very bad situation, right? We've played 4-3-3s, we've played 3-5-2s, we've played 5-3-2s, we've played 4-2-3-1s. You name it, we've probably given it a go in the past few weeks. And none of them have worked. And if that is the case, I believe that we have to have a look at the players who are playing week in, week out and say, what are you doing to help turn this situation around, right? Because, so think back to last season, Carabao Cup final, for example. Now, I'm not saying Eddie Howe has ever been the best at adapting tactically in the game. In fact, I think that's probably one of his weakest points as a manager. But if you look back at that Carabao Cup final last year, he set us up in a way that played perfectly against the weaknesses of Liverpool, and Arne Slot had absolutely no idea what to do about it. There's a photo of him on the screen with his hands on his hips going, what on earth do I do about this, right? And that's one thing that Eddie Howe's been good at over the years, analysing the way that another side plays tactically and picking holes in it and figuring out how to beat them. Now, I don't believe that sort of skill can just completely dissipate in the space of a year. Last year he was doing that. This year he's not, right? Or is he not? Or do we have to look at the players and say, are you just not executing what he wants from you correctly this year? Because for me, there's a lack of intensity, there's a lack of bite, there's a lack of impetus week in, week out. We just look like we don't really care. Bar a handful of players, Malik Thiaw, Lewis Hall, Bruno, Lewis Miley. Maybe there's a few others who can sneak in there, but that's probably about it for me. So at a certain point, I'm thinking, if Eddie Howe's now changing the system, right, he's now clearly seen that what he was doing isn't working. In past few weeks, I'd argue we've actually gotten worse when we are trying to change the system. So for me, the players have to take a look at themselves and say, are we actually performing well enough? And that's what Eddie Howe kind of said in his press conference yesterday, in a less brazen way than I've just said it. He said that he needs to do better, not in the amount of effort that he puts in, but in his processes and the way he sets us up and all that sort of thing. But he also mentioned that the players need to look at themselves and think, are the performances that I'm putting in of the best level that I can expect of myself? And for most of those players on that football pitch, I'm telling you right now, that is not the case. And what makes it worse for me is, in the summer, if we continue this way, say we finish 12th or 13th this season, right? There's players in that squad who are going to sit there and go, the performances we're putting in don't match the ambition, I want to leave, I want to go to a bigger club. Take Sandro Tonali, for example. I don't know if he would do that, but I reckon he probably would with all the discourse at the minute around him. But for me, you're the one who got us, not Sandro specifically, but those players are the ones who got us into this position in the first place, right? So what are you going to do to get us out of it? You can't sit there and want to leave because we aren't playing well if you're not putting in the performances to warrant us playing well to get to the position that you want us to get to, can you? That's the way I look at it, and I think there's a lot of players on that pitch who aren't putting in the effort. Now, Anthony Elanga, I was shocked that he didn't start yesterday, given the way that he played against City. Now, there was times where the quality was still lacking, but he was running hard. He was the goal was a really good goal. He came on, he gave a little bit of attacking input, a little bit of attacking impetus. So I was surprised he didn't start. Asula, when he came on yesterday, again, gave you that little bit of intensity that we've been missing, right? And I think now, if ever, is the time for Eddie Howe to stop playing the players that he thinks are the best players and play the players who are going to put in the effort to get out of this situation, right? Now, I don't know what's going on with Sandro, but for example, I'd drop him and I'd bring Ramsey in because I think Ramsey deserves more minutes as it is, right? But I think Ramsey's the sort of player who's going to give you his all every week, even if he's playing poorly on the ball. He's still going to work hard. He's still going to run hard. I'd put him in. Honestly, given the way the two strikers are playing, I think we have to give one of those strikers a run of games. I don't think we can keep chopping and changing them every week, despite what squad rotation would tell you. I think we should just stick Walter Motter in the 9 and play him because he's proven that he can score goals if we give him the service. But for the Spurs game, I'd start Asula, right? Because you know he's going to give you 100%. He might not be the best tactically, he might not be the best with the ball at his feet, but he's going to come in, he's going to run hard, and he's going to try and earn his place in the squad. And I think there's a few players at this point who probably deserve to be dropped just to kind of make a point and say, lads, you need to start performing better, otherwise I'm just going to play the players that I know are going to work hard for us for the rest of the season. And so, having said all that about the players, I do think that all the criticism of Eddie Howe is slightly harsh. Now, I will say that I understand the opinions about a change possibly being what we need. Possibly we do need a fresh face to come in and just freshen things up after the way that abhorrent summer went, which we will talk about a little bit in a second. And I'm erring on the side of possibly we do also need a change, but the way that Eddie Howe has navigated the whole takeover period and the ambitions that we have over the past few years, I don't think can be completely discounted, right? Because we're only 5 years into the new ownership. We've been in the Champions League twice. We've won a trophy. We've consistently been in the European hunt in the Premier League, right? So I don't think that can completely be discounted, but I don't discount the opinions of those who believe that we could possibly do with a new manager. The problem I have with those opinions is that a lot of them have been purely to abuse Eddie Howe and not to kind of offer another opinion, right? So you can sit there and criticise him all you want, but you can do it in a respectable way. You can offer alternatives in a respectable way. It doesn't all have to be, he's a mug, or call him every name under the sun, just because things are going slightly wrong at the minute. For the first time in 4 years under his reign, things are going slightly wrong. That doesn't mean that we have to crucify him for it and get rid of him at the first sign of anything going wrong. But I do also agree with the sentiment that this cannot be considered a blip anymore, because we have been so poor for so long now, the entire season. I don't remember the last time we played well other than the PSG game. Coincidentally, we've been better in the Champions League, which just feels like a bit of an anomaly at this point. Crashed out of the Carabao Cup, still in the FA Cup, barely. Terrible in the Premier League. So yeah, I do. Something has to change. I don't know what it is. Maybe it does need to be a new manager. Maybe we give him to the end of the season, then maybe look if there's better options out there. Maybe we give him to the end of the season and give him a summer where he can work with the players that he brought in, because let's not beat around the bush. The last summer was an absolute shambles. There's been a lot said about the recruitment, which, again, I don't disagree with you on. Vissa doesn't feel like the right signing. He's lazy, hasn't been particularly good. Nick Waltermodder, I still think, will be very good for Newcastle United if we give him a run of games, let him play, give him a bit of service. Alanga is becoming a little bit better. Ramsey, I still think Ramsey's really good. And Tior, I still think Tior's really good. But there has been a lot of concerns about that recruitment, and a lot of that has been aimed at specifically Eddie Howe. Now, I know Eddie Howe had, in theory, a big part to play in the recruitment of us last summer, but I do think that blaming Eddie Howe entirely for those recruitment issues is almost fruitless, because he was left without a recruitment team on the eve of the transfer window. The whole not Phil Mitchell, he's from EastEnders, the whole Paul Mitchell thing happened, which, granted, you could say was down to Eddie Howe not being able to work with Paul Mitchell, but there's still something weird about that for me, because there was a lot of things said about Paul Mitchell after he left. the whole Isak thing took up most of the summer. We didn't know whether we were coming or going for most of it. We didn't know whether we were going to have a striker, whether we needed to buy a striker, whether we were going to have 125 million more pounds in the funds to go and buy players with, or whether we were going to have to make do with what we already had in the bank. Like, there were so many different factors going on in that summer, and Eddie Howe was left with 2 weeks, had to pick out the players that he essentially wanted to recruit almost entirely by himself because he didn't have a team to help him do that. Now, there's another side to that, which is Steve Nixon. Now, Steve Nixon has been suggesting players for Newcastle to buy for some time now, since, 2017, 2016, I think it was when he came in, right? And so this January, for example, when Eddie Howe came out in the press conference after the January transfer window closed and said that we couldn't strengthen, there was people coming out and saying that we didn't, the right opportunity didn't arise. Now, there's a Brazilian young lad called Ryan who Steve Nixon suggested last summer, maybe even the January or summer before that, as someone we should be looking to sign. Would have been peanuts at the time. Now, we waited and waited, didn't sign him, and then this January, after Semenyo left, Bournemouth signed him for £24.5 million. Now, I don't know if you saw, granted, we'll not talk about whatever the defending was from Luca Dini, turned into NPC for a couple of minutes, but Ryan scored on his debut. And the reason that we didn't sign him was apparently because he wasn't Prem proven. Now, if that is actually the case, and that is why we didn't sign him, then that raises other problems around Eddie Howe and the recruitment. Because if we're now suggesting players who would help us out in more ways than one, and we aren't signing them because Eddie Howe's preference is to sign Prem proven players, then we do have a bit of a problem. And the whole thing around Paul Mitchell saying that the recruitment system is majorly flawed and needs a revamp, and then that in theory being what meant that Eddie Howe fell out with him and then led to him leaving, could well be the case if we're now saying that those players who we could sign are going to other clubs because Eddie Howe doesn't think they're Prem proven. Yeah, all in all, it feels like it's a little bit of a mess right now, and it's definitely a hangover from the summer. Nothing can dispute that. Eddie Howe's having trouble, the players are having trouble. Clearly something went on behind the scenes as well during that Isak exit, because the whole Lascelles thing was a bit odd. He doesn't feel right to be playing games, not that he would have been playing anyway, but not even on the bench, and then he goes to Leicester and immediately starts starting football matches. That's a bit odd to me. There's just a lot of things which I think there's some murky waters at the club right now, and it all stems from that blooming Alexander Isak, doesn't it? Anyway, that's not the point. Let's not get back onto that topic. That's well far and gone. Now, am I Eddie Howe in or Eddie Howe out? At this very moment, we're on the edge. I'm still Eddie Howe in because I still believe that he can turn it around. I think he needs more from his players. I think we give him. I just don't. We can't sack him before the end of the season. We're not going to get relegated. Touch wood. Touch all the wood you can possibly find. We're not going to get relegated. So I'm okay to give him. I want to say another year, because I think if we give him till the end of the season, you can't then sack him and not give him the summer, if that makes sense. But I also don't think we can sack him now. It's a very strange predicament that we currently find ourselves in. But at this very current moment, as I speak to you right now, I am still Eddie Howe in. Although I do believe that there's a possibility that there are better options out there, if that makes any sense. I'm probably contradicting myself there, but you understand the sentiment. And for me, it feels like the club is a bit of a crossroads following the summer transfer window, and there's a few different decisions that could be made, and we don't really know what any of them mean. If we keep Eddie Howe, it could continue to get worse, and we have to get rid of him anyway. If we get rid of Eddie Howe, whoever we bring in could not galvanise the squad, and we could end up in the same position. We give them a summer, realise they're not fit for purpose, and have to get somebody else in, because that's the sort of thing that happened with Sir Bobby Robson, for example. And it almost feels like if we do get rid of Eddie Howe, we're going to end up with the next coming of Graham Souness. That's what it feels like to me, and we're going to end up with someone who just doesn't understand it, doesn't get it, and can't implement what they want to implement properly, and just ends up kind of fizzling out into nothing. I hope that's not the case, but that is why I want to keep Eddie Howe for at least this season, give him the summer maybe to work with those players, sign a couple more here and there to reinforce the squad if possible, which it seems like it's going to be possible with all the discourse coming out of the club around the money we've got to spend, and then give him another year. And maybe give him until next January, and if it's still absolutely horrendous in the first half of next season, get rid of him, bring a new manager in who can sort things out in the transfer window maybe. And yeah, I'm back. This is a lot later in the day because I just forgot to film an outro and decided to go on a rant about how I didn't want Jose Mourinho as manager instead, which I'm not going to include in the video because I was absolutely waffling, I'll be honest with you. But yeah, so let me know in the comments down below what you think of the current situation at Newcastle United. Are you Eddie Howe in? Are you Eddie Howe out? I imagine most of you will be Eddie Howe out. Like, subscribe if you would like to, if you like just hearing me waffle about football, because I plan to do this a bit more in the future, not just about Newcastle, about all sorts of things, but this was a very obvious starting point, let's be honest, wasn't it? But yeah, I will see you in the next one.